Introduction to mixing. So when we look at mixing, we're thinking about trying to get things to sound right. Now, you actually start mixing often when you've actually just started recording. As you're recording, you're thinking about how the sounds work together, how the parts work together, how the instruments work together, or the artist's thinking about how the parts work together, and you're thinking about how the sounds work together. You're thinking about how they should appear in the stereo field, how loud they should be. You kind of start these things right from the beginning and doing all those kind of rough mixes or monitor mixes for the artist to be able to hear their recording while their instruments while they're recording. But what we're trying to do when we mix is we're trying to get all the parts you've recorded to come out of the speakers with the feeling that you recorded, or as the song dictates or the artist wants. So we're trying to get those choruses kind of to pop out, to be big, and we're trying to get perhaps the verses to drop down a bit. We're trying to get some emotion out of things, and I know that seems strange when often we're talking about technical sides of things, but the technical things are there so that we can try and evoke emotions on things, and we will be looking at the technical side today. The problem is we're mixing it on a set of speakers or a set of headphones that we know well or we like, but we've got no idea what people are going to listen to it on right at the end. So we've got no idea if they're going to be listening to it on a nice set of monitors like there are in the studio, a decent set of headphones, or whether they're going to be listening to them on earbuds, that have next to no bass frequencies and really close to the ears when they're reproducing stuff, and you might hear more detail in the panning on headphones or earbuds than you do when you're sitting in front of speakers, and you don't know if they might be listening to it on a rubbishy radio or a small player of some kind, or on an Alexa. All these things kind of have variations in the tonality of the speakers that are there, and we don't know what people are going to listen to it on. But at the moment, we're just going to concentrate on how we hear it and what we're doing to it, and then later on we'll look at the idea of how we can try and get things to translate, or what we think will translate across. So what we can do to mix things, what can we do to mix things? And we're looking at this as kind of an early level of what we're doing. We could use volume, gain, level to change the tonality, to change the volume of something. We can change the tonality with the gain of overloading things a bit, but we're actually looking at the level, how loud something is. If it's louder, it would appear closer to us. If it's quieter, it appears further away. If we have EQ on it, we might decide to put brightness on to make something sound closer, and we only hear brightness when it's quite close to us. Brightness usually dies off quite quickly. All those high frequencies die off quite quickly as the sounds move away from us. So taking high frequencies off a sound will dull it down into the background. So that's a good way of thinking about, the depth of field, the depth of how close or how far something is. We've got pan to think about the left and right, where things are coming out of either side. Panning can also help if we have two instruments with a similar sound, to give them some definition. So we might use it for definition of the instruments. And we'll talk a bit about that in a minute as well. We can use different sorts of processing. We think about dynamic processing, we think about effects processing. We'll start off with dynamic processing, thinking about things that turn the sounds up or down. Again, it's kind of a level based thing. EQ, we're turning up and down different frequencies. We're boosting different frequencies, we're cutting different frequencies. As we've talked about before, often cutting frequencies sound softer than boosting them. You can sometimes be boosting an area which there isn't much of a frequency there, and sometimes that could be pleasurable. If you're boosting really high frequencies, we often talk about adding air to the sound, or boosting those frequencies to get some kind of thump to it, but it often sounds cleaner with cutting. It's good to get into that idea of cutting frequencies, turning frequencies down to see what's left there. And then we've got compression expanding, that squashing of the dynamic range in compression to make it so the loud sounds are slightly quieter, and then you turn up the overall volume, the overall RMS of the sound, so it's all a bit louder, but the loud parts are slightly quieter. Or expanding, which works exactly the opposite of compression, where the quieter bits get turned even quieter, and the louder bits kind of stay where they are. It sounds like you should be able to, if you've overcompressed something, expand it, but unfortunately once you've lost those dynamics you can't bring back those dynamics with expanding. So yes. So we can also think about effects processing, and these are time-based. We often talk about time-based effects, things like reverb, where we're adding on thousands of reflections from different surfaces to come back to the ear and at different times, so that we get this sense of being inside a room or inside an area with the instrument. They can be very good at putting things into the background as well. We often hear things with less of the direct sound and more of the reverb sound as being a long way away, because that's how it would be in real life. Someone's standing a long way away from you and they shout, you typically will hear a lot of the reflections at the same time or before we actually hear the direct signal. And then we've got delay, which can again give a sense of space, or we can kind of use it as a nice ping pong effect of doubling up things, spreading things around. Can use it for quite a few different things. And then the last one's chorus, phasing and flanging, which are all basically the same idea. We have a signal which we delay by a few milliseconds, maybe 8, 10, 12, 20 milliseconds, depending on whether you're chorusing, phasing or flanging. And you also get a modulation frequency, a carrier frequency that you modulate in pitch, and then you kind of add the delay and the modulation and the dry sound together, and you get kind of a movement of things. It's very quick delay that's on there, but chorus, phasing and flanging are all the same. We often get a bit of chorusing, phasing inside reverbs as sound travels up and down the room. Depending on how warm different areas are, we kind of get thermals, and that will change the pitch, the modulation of things, of how quick something travels and reflects back to you. So you often get a bit of modulation happening inside a reverb to make it sound even more natural reverb. So before we start, it's always good to get all the editing, tuning, everything in time, everything how you want it to be before you actually start the mix. We want to kind of keep our head clear for just thinking about the creative side of things and the way that we're getting all the instruments to sit, rather than necessarily having to think about, that's slightly out of time, I need to cut that and put that in time, or that's not in tune. Now, these are just kind of guides. Obviously, sometimes you'll get to mix and you'll get there and you will suddenly think, that now sounds out of time, I need to edit that to bring it in time. I'm not saying you can't edit during the mix, I'm just saying it's good to get as much of that done and as much of the tuning done before you actually start the mixing, so you can just concentrate on one thing rather than having to go backwards and forwards and thinking things don't sound quite right at that point because it's out of time or it's out of tune. I'll do that in a minute. It's always good to get those done first. Things I always like to do before I start mixing is set up a master fader on your Pro Tools session so that everything's running into that, and you can put some dynamic processing perhaps on that, or some overall EQ of the song at a later stage, or you can just turn things up and down, the whole mix up and down. I also like grouping instruments together and getting some effects set up and maybe an extra track for parallel compression. Let's have a look at the track I've given you. So I've given you this basic track that we recorded in YouTube in New York for Rope-a-Dope some years ago. All the band in the live room playing together. In fact, all the band are in one room playing together, and we mic them up. It's quite interesting because the band only had, we were recording, I think it was 6 bands during the few days we were there, and this band came in and they set up, said they'd got a gig, so they were going to have to leave in a couple of hours. I was worried. We got a really quick sound check done, and then they played, and they were phenomenal. They played one take of each of their songs after we'd done the sound check, and each one was, we kept the first take and didn't do any others. So it just shows that idea of professionalism. They were well rehearsed, knew what they were doing, came in, did it, and left. So here we have, I'm going to group all the drums together. Click on one, and then I'm going to use my modifier keys, alternate and shift. Alternate means everything changes, but shift means I'm only changing the things that I have highlighted. I'm going to come down and go, instead of sending it all out to a bus and then creating a new auxiliary channel and naming that and naming the bus so I know what's going on, I'm going to come down and let Pro Tools do it all for me. I'll go new track, and I'm not, it's called aux at the moment, but I'm going to call it drum bus. Make sure it's stereo and create that, and there you see I now have all of these routed out into this, and this is my main fader for that. The other thing I'll do is I will solo safe it's this channel, so that if I hit solo on any of these I can still hear what's coming out. So you do command and click on the solo, and that makes it solo safe. So now you can see everything else mutes out except that channel that I've got there. So I've got that. I said I was going to make a master fader as well. So shift command N, the shortcut for that, and then I've got my finger on command and pressing the down buttons to select master fader, and the left right buttons so I can go along to stereo. Create that. That happens at the end. There I have a master fader which I can again put some processing on there should I want to. I also wanted to create a reverb. In fact, I'm going to create a couple of reverbs on this. I'm going to come down and I'm going to do the same thing on sends. I'm going to go new track, auxiliary input. I'll call this snare reverb, but it could be for all the drums and it could be for all different things. These types of things I kind of quite like a short ambient. I'm just going to use the stock Pro Tools ones at the moment on this. So I'll use a deverb, and I'm going to do small, and let's perhaps put it on plate, small plate, anything under a second. Start off with tune that as we go. Make sure that I've just got the affected signal coming out of my auxiliary, so I've got that there. And I'm also going to send this out my drum bus because I want that to, if I was going to put compression or anything across the whole drums, I'd want that reverb to be involved in that as well. So I've got some reverb there, got my fader to send it up there when I'm ready. Then the other thing, I'm going to do a longer reverb on there. I'm going to come down to send 2, just like keeping things a bit separated so that I can like keeping things a bit separated, just so I can see quickly where things are, whether I've got the send on there. So I just call this rev, stereo again. Okay, it's come out here. I'll put another deverb on it. I might do that the kind of taking off all the high frequencies and low frequencies with an EQ on that. So I'll come here and put that on medium. I'd probably put that under 2.6 seconds, under 2.5 seconds to start off with, something around there. I'll put an EQ on here and just take off the high and low straight away, maybe down to, once I started listening to it, I'd start thinking about what I really want on that. Let's not use that one, let's use it in the low pass filter. Bring it down, just take off some of those high frequencies. Those high frequencies often can make things stick out a bit too much in the mix on the reverb. So I've got my reverbs there, I've got my grouping, put the master fader at the end again. I've got everything here. I'd think about my panning as well. I'd probably think about this straight away, just because I don't want to hear all the drums in mono. I'd think straight away that I want to hear them as I was looking at the drummer. So I'd put the rack tom over to the right hand side. Most drummers, well, 90% of the population being right-handed, so only 10% of drummers should be left-handed, and I know he was a right-handed drummer, so I'm going to put that over there. My overheads, again, I'm going to put the hi-hats side over to the right and the ride side over to the left, so I've got those already panned. Often when I'm recording, I kind of like to have things really hard panned. Benefit of that is you can really hear the separation, so if something goes wrong, you know what's instrument it's gone wrong, because you know about the panning to it. So often guitars panned hard left, hard right, toms panned all over the place, so you can hear if they've hit a microphone, you know which microphone they've hit. It's kind of good to get that separation, overcome those masking frequencies. Those masking frequencies are the frequencies that are in more than one instrument. When we kind of look at things, we think about that a lot of instruments have a low mid-end to them. So if we, and that's kind of around 150, 300, 400 hertz. So if we're looking at those frequencies, we can really concentrate on those to try and clean them up, to get rid of some of that dirge, some of that fatness that's inside the recording, and give it a bit more space. If you take out too many, everything will sound really thin, but if you take out the right amount, you kind of get a lot more clarity inside your mix. Your bass will often be around 200 hertz, where we're kind of getting the clarity from the bass as well. So if we can try and clean those out in some of the other instruments, we'll get the bass coming through a bit better as well. Having said that, you know, we get a lot of grunt from like distorted guitars, could be around that 250, 200 hertz mark, so we perhaps wouldn't want to clean that out too much. We might find with those we might want to clean out some of the kind of 1K or something to try and get rid of maybe some of the harshness to it, and give some room to the vocalist. Excuse me, the vocalist's normally kind of around 800 hertz to 1K. That's kind of where we can hear a good definition inside the vocals, so we might want to take that out of some things. Typically on toms, I'd be looking at the idea of trying to perhaps take out the fundamental. You often have the mic really close to the tom, and you do get that fundamental coming through, which again is around 200-300 hertz, and we might just want that brightness to it, and the low end, and not have all that kind of thick sound to it. So yeah, taking out 200-300 hertz. So my challenge kind of with this, you trying this, is you try just always using a one band EQ and setting all your mix up with a one band EQ on things, and then try putting some compression on as well. So on all the instruments, look for that kind of major fundamental, or the major, the main masking frequency, which is coming in on things. As we were talking before, keep the EQ quite wide, and then kind of sweep it up or down. On the toms, I'd be looking for where that big boom kind of disappears. I will give you a hint on the overheads. We've got quite a lot of spill because everyone was playing in the same room. And the snare drum is the crack of the snare drums really being picked up by the overheads, so it might be worth looking at around the 1.5 1.2k on the EQ and trying taking that out, so you remove some of that initial click on it, and then you will probably find that the close mic on the snare kind of works a bit better, and you can get a bit more tone out of the snare rather than just a click on it. Again, with the electric piano, you're probably looking at those 200-300 hertz. Just try sweeping it around and seeing what you can get rid of to clear it up. Yes, try the mix, send it to me. I'll record a video feedback for each person that sends it in, and I'll email that just to you, so please do try it. Thank you, goodbye.